I bet you didn't know just how much the US trade war has shaped your daily life. Stay informed with subscribe now for stories that reveal the truth behind global events. Today, we're diving into the US trade war, a saga that has shaped our global economy and everyday lives. It seemed like an endless cycle of tariffs and tensions, but now, we've reached a turning point with new agreements signaling a shift. This isn't just a news story, it's a significant change in the global landscape. We'll explore how it started, key moments, and what it means for the future of trade. So, grab a coffee, get comfortable, and let's uncover this world together. To truly understand how the trade war reached its dramatic conclusion, we must first journey back to its origins. A story rooted in decades of economic transformation, shifting global power, and mounting frustration. The seeds of conflict were sown long before tariffs made headlines, in the factories and boardrooms of a changing America. For much of the 20th century, the United States was the world's manufacturing powerhouse. But as globalization accelerated, many American industries struggled to compete with cheaper labor and production costs overseas. Factories closed, jobs disappeared, and entire communities felt left behind. This sense of loss fueled a growing belief that the global trade system was fundamentally unfair to American workers. At the heart of these grievances was the US-China relationship. As China's economy boomed, so did concerns over practices like intellectual property theft, forced technology transfers, and state subsidies that gave Chinese companies an edge. American businesses complained that their innovations were being copied and that access to the Chinese market came with strings attached. The numbers told a stark story. Year after year, the US trade deficit with China ballooned, reaching hundreds of billions of dollars. To many, this deficit was more than just an economic statistic. It was a symbol of a one-sided relationship, where American consumers fueled China's rise while domestic industries suffered. When Donald Trump took office, he promised to rewrite the rules of global trade. His administration adopted a confrontational approach, arguing that previous policies had failed to protect American interests. Tariffs became the weapon of choice, a bold, controversial move designed to force China and other trading partners to the negotiating table. The logic was simple. By making Chinese goods more expensive, tariffs would encourage companies and consumers to buy American-made products. The hope was to revive domestic manufacturing, restore lost jobs, and send a clear message that the US would no longer tolerate what it saw as unfair trade practices. The first wave of tariffs in 2018 targeted billions of dollars in Chinese imports, but the conflict quickly escalated. Each new round of tariffs was met with retaliation, as both sides dug in for a prolonged economic battle. China struck back with its own tariffs, hitting key American exports like soybeans, cars, and machinery. Farmers, manufacturers, and exporters across the US suddenly found themselves caught in the crossfire, facing shrinking markets and rising uncertainty. The tit-for-tat measures sent shockwaves through global supply chains. Companies scrambled to adapt, shifting production, rerouting shipments, and bracing for unpredictable costs. Financial markets grew volatile, and consumers around the world began to feel the effects in the form of higher prices and limited choices. But the conflict didn't stop at China's borders. US tariffs also targeted allies like Canada, Mexico, and the European Union, sparking outrage and countermeasures. The global consensus on free trade, carefully built over decades, began to fracture. The renegotiation of NAFTA into the USMCA was just one example of this broader strategy. The Trump administration sought to rewrite trade deals across the board, aiming to secure better terms for American workers and industries. As alliances strained and old certainties crumbled, the world watched anxiously. The era of predictable, rules-based trade was giving way to a new age of confrontation and uncertainty. The trade war was not just a policy dispute. It was the culmination of long-standing grievances, economic anxieties, and a dramatic shift in US strategy. It marked a turning point in how America engaged with the world. In the end, the trade war reshaped global supply chains, impacted everyday consumers and left the world economy facing a future filled with new risks and unresolved tensions. The trade war between the United States and China once seemed like a conflict with no end in sight. For months, headlines were dominated by stories of new tariffs, retaliatory measures, and growing uncertainty in global markets. Businesses and consumers alike braced for impact, unsure of what the future would hold as tensions escalated. Yet, even as the public narrative focused on confrontation, subtle shifts began to take place behind closed doors. Diplomats and negotiators from both sides quietly explored off-ramps, searching for ways to ease the standoff without losing face. At home, the economic pain became impossible to ignore. American families saw prices rise on everyday goods, while business owners struggled to absorb the higher costs of imported materials. The ripple effects of tariffs were felt in every corner of the economy, from small shops to large manufacturers. U.S. businesses, especially those reliant on global supply chains, faced mounting pressure. Many were forced to make difficult decisions, cutting jobs, delaying investments, or passing costs on to consumers. The need for a new approach became increasingly clear. Nowhere was the impact more severe than in American agriculture. Farmers, once optimistic about exporting to China, found themselves locked out of a crucial market. Protests erupted across rural communities as crops went unsold, and livelihoods were threatened. With China closing its doors to U.S. farm products, the pain was immediate and widespread. Entire harvests sat in storage, and the uncertainty weighed heavily on farming families. Meanwhile, the world watched anxiously. The trade war's drag on the global economy became a central topic at international summits. Stock markets fluctuated, and leaders from Europe to Asia urged both sides to find common ground. After months of negotiation, the Phase 1 trade deal in early 2020 marked a significant turning point. It wasn't a complete resolution, but it was a much-needed truce that signaled a willingness to step back from the brink. As part of the agreement, the U.S. rolled back some of the most punishing tariffs, offering relief to businesses and consumers. The move was welcomed by markets and signaled a shift toward dialogue over confrontation. The deal also included commitments from China to increase purchases of American goods, especially in agriculture and manufacturing. This brought hope to struggling farmers and exporters, eager to rebuild lost relationships. Importantly, the agreement addressed long-standing concerns over intellectual property, with new provisions aimed at protecting American innovation and technology. But just as the dust began to settle, the COVID-19 pandemic swept across the globe. Priorities shifted overnight, as both nations faced a common threat. The crisis underscored the need for cooperation, not conflict, in a deeply interconnected world. With the arrival of the Biden administration, the tone changed further. Rather than escalating tensions, the new approach emphasized rebuilding alliances and working with partners to address shared challenges, from trade to public health. High-level talks continued, leading to more stable and lasting agreements. Both sides recognized that their economies, and their futures, were deeply intertwined, making cooperation not just preferable, but essential for global stability. With the trade war's end, who won? It's nuanced, with varied gains. American consumers benefit from tariff rollbacks, easing price pressures. U.S. industries targeted by retaliatory tariffs, like agriculture, regain critical markets. Multinational corporations find stability, easing long-term planning. Southeast Asian countries gained from supply chain diversification. Global logistics and shipping industries see more predictable trade flows. The U.S. financial sector gains access to China's market, a long-sought opportunity. The WTO and global economic stability benefit from a return to negotiated agreements. The trade war left deep and lasting scars across the economic landscape, with some communities and industries paying a particularly heavy price. For many small towns, the closure of factories and local businesses meant more than just lost jobs. It signaled the unraveling of the social fabric that held these places together. Families faced uncertainty, and once thriving main streets became lined with empty storefronts, echoing the broader consequences of global conflict. U.S. industries that were once protected by tariffs now face renewed competition from abroad. While some companies initially benefited from these protective measures, the sudden removal of tariffs forced them to adapt quickly, often at great cost. Many found themselves struggling to compete with cheaper imports, leading to layoffs, reduced hours, and in some cases, permanent closures. Businesses that had adapted to the trade war environment by shifting supply chains, investing in new technologies, or finding alternative markets, may now find themselves at a disadvantage. The rapid changes in policy created uncertainty, making it difficult for companies to plan for the future or invest confidently in growth. To cushion the blow, the government provided billions in subsidies, especially to farmers and manufacturers hit hardest by retaliatory tariffs. But these subsidies came at a cost. Ultimately, it was taxpayers who bore the financial burden, raising questions about the long-term sustainability of such support. On the global stage, the U.S. lost some credibility and leverage, straining alliances that had taken decades to build. Diplomatic relationships were tested as partners questioned America's commitment to open markets and predictable policy. For workers, the impact was personal and immediate. Many faced higher costs for everyday goods, while the promise of new job opportunities often failed to materialize. The uncertainty left families anxious about their futures, and communities struggled to recover from the economic shock. China, too, suffered significant economic damage, but the conflict accelerated its efforts to diversify supply chains and reduce reliance on U.S. markets. This shift is reshaping global trade patterns, with long-term consequences for both countries. The principle of free trade was fundamentally challenged, fueling protectionist sentiments not just in the U.S. and China, but around the world. As countries reconsidered their trade policies, new barriers emerged, threatening decades of economic integration. Small and medium-sized businesses, lacking the resources of larger corporations, struggled the most. Higher costs, disrupted supply chains, and lost access to key markets forced many to close their doors, leaving lasting scars on local economies. The chaotic and unpredictable nature of policymaking during the trade war damaged the U.S.'s reputation as a stable and reliable business environment. Investors and companies now approach the American market with greater caution, wary of sudden changes that could upend their plans. The trade war's end marks a new chapter, not a return to 2017. Supply chain resilience is a focus, with friendshoring and nearshoring trends. U.S.-China competition shifts to technology and national security. A bipartisan consensus on tougher China policies and domestic investment emerges. Regional trade blocs and agreements gain importance. Technology becomes central to global competition, with trade policy as a tool. Consumers face mixed outcomes, with potential higher costs for resilient supply chains. The U.S. debates balancing national security and economic efficiency. The global order becomes more multipolar, with countries charting their own courses. The U.S. trade war story is one of economic and human impact. It raises questions about the world we want and our country's role. Understanding trade, technology, and competition is crucial for the future. The end of the trade war is a starting point for a new global race. Thank you for joining this deep dive. Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's continue uncovering our world together.